So September, we always work on step 9, which is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. The prospect of making such admissions can raise a fair bit of fear in many of us. We often rationalize that dredging up the past serves no real purpose. Let sleeping dogs lie is an expression that comes to mind, as well as, why should I open old wounds? Well, much has been said about the importance of making amends, both from a spiritual perspective and in 12-step meetings. The Bible stresses the importance of making things right with our fellow men in a number of passages of Scripture. The Big Book says that we need to find a higher power and clean up the wreckage of our past. And step 9 is part of cleaning up that wreckage. In meetings, we hear things like taking our own inventory and cleaning our own side of the street. Making amends, keeping short accounts, righting wrongs are all keystones in most religions, and even for non-religious types, they are important values to live by. So there must be something to the importance of such acts. So why make amends? Why does the Bible talk so much about it? And why is it such a big part of our program? I mean, look at it. Step 4, 5, and 8 are all preparing us for making our amends in step 9. And step 10 is even to a large extent about making amends. So that's 5 out of our 12 steps. So it must be a big deal for them to put that much focus on it. I like to keep things simple. So when I was looking for scripture for tonight, I bypassed all the well-known passages about forgiveness and making things right with a brother who has wronged us and so on. And there's a passage which has been to be known as the Golden Rule, and it's from the book of Luke. So do you have this? There it is. From the book of Luke, chapter 6, verse 31, it says, "Do unto others as you would like them to do to you." Simple. We're to treat others the way that we would want to be treated. That's why we make amends. If we have been hurt by someone, we would want them to apologize and make it right. So we do the same. But if only it was that simple. First of all, usually because of our drinking and drugging, the list has become pretty long, so it's intimidating. And second, because of some of the things that we have done, if we're rigorously honest, they were pretty bad. So shame starts to block us. We get into a shame spiral downward, and we start beating ourselves up, and we start to hear the old tapes about what a terrible person we are, what a failure, what a loser, and we want to run away from those feelings. But shame, as awful as it feels, has a gift for us, just like all of our feelings do. I spoke about the gift of feelings a couple of months ago and explained that the gift of shame is humility. Now, humility is a pretty important thing to have. If you read the 12 by 12, it talks a lot about humility. The two most important characteristics that one can have if they're going to make it in sobriety and in recovery are honesty and humility. So let's talk for a minute about honesty. If we're not honest, we will lie, cheat, steal, and most importantly, lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves things like we can quit anytime, that we aren't as bad as that person, that we aren't hurting anyone but ourselves, and of course the big one, maybe someday I'll be able to drink or use normally again. We also lie to ourselves about why we can't make amends to someone, why they may be hurt, or that we have done our part by doing a living amends. So let's bring it back to keeping it simple. If someone has hurt us, we would want them to do an amends. So we do the same. Do unto others. And we have to remember that every lie we tell starts with a lie to ourselves. Lies like, I can get away with this. Nobody's going to get hurt. But every time we lie, it eats away at our self-esteem and our integrity. I talked a moment ago about humility as a gift of shame. Shame is one of the most debilitating feelings that we have, and shame loves secrets. Shame keeps us from doing our step 4 thoroughly and from telling everything in our step 5. It keeps us from doing our step 9. And we are only as sick as our secrets, and secrets are about shame. I want you to think about, if you can remember, the first time you said, "My name is Brad and I'm an alcoholic," or "I'm an addict." And think about how hard it was to admit that you had a problem. And that's about shame. I have people who tell me they never had a problem admitting they had a problem. And to them I say, "Poppycock." Actually, I don't, but we're in church, so. They just don't remember what it was like. They hid how bad it had become, about how much they were using and how often, or they wouldn't be where they're at right now. They keep secrets, and shame loves that. Making amends breaks down shame. It eliminates secrets, and it improves self-esteem. And it fosters an attitude of humility. Humility is the opposite of unhealthy ego. If we stay humble, admit our faults and wrongs done to other people, and don't have to puff ourselves up to impress others, life is a whole lot easier. If you focus on the gift of humility rather than on the ugliness of shame, you'll want to get through your amends more quickly. When people who are in the program come to me and say they are struggling, I find it is typically because of one of 2 steps, which either they haven't done or they need to do again. Step 4 and step 9. Why? Because shame is holding them back. Usually some deep, dark secret that they decided to keep, or some amends that they don't want to do. I get that. But if they believe in the importance of and focus on the gift of shame rather than shame itself, it will give them the motivation it takes to do what needs to be done. I said at the outset that it's simple. We make amends because we would want or even expect the same of others if they hurt us. So I got to thinking, most of us who find themselves in 12-step programs, this service, or in therapy, grew up in families with some measure of dysfunction. Some of us with lots of dysfunction. I know for myself, growing up in an alcoholic, abusive family provided lots of opportunity for people to make amends. There was lots to apologize for. But I don't remember anyone ever making a true amends in my family. Sure, there were amends that we made when your dad would say, "Go apologize to your mom or you're not getting any dinner," or "Go apologize to your brother or I'm going to smack you upside the head." But I never remember my dad apologizing for getting drunk, keeping me awake all night, and yelling at my mom. I never remember my mom saying anything like, "I'm sorry I lost my temper and beat you." In fact, those beatings usually started with something like, "This is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you." I never really believed that one. And these beatings usually ended up with, "Stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about," which was odd because she already had. However, she did teach me the meaning of irony, and I guess I should be thankful for that. When I thought about my own family and the types of family which many of you grew up in, I wonder how many of us had the amends process modeled for us. not likely too many, and not likely very often. So how would we know how to do it? How would we know what it looked like? How would we know what it felt like, either making an amends or receiving one? Our families were saturated in denial, with no healthy boundaries, and so we had no footsteps to follow in. And that's why I chose the Golden Rule as the scripture for tonight. Most of us certainly had no baseline for comparison. So keep it simple. Make amends because it is what you would want somebody to do for you. And of course, there's the ever-present happy byproduct called humility. And I don't know about you, but I can always use some more of that. On the topic of keeping it simple, I think simplifying our lives is important if we want to reduce stress, improve relationships, sleep better, and have better physical and emotional health. I think our society today is too plugged in to our phones, to our computers, to our televisions. And if you don't think so, try this little experiment. Just give your phone, your computer, and the power cord from your television to a friend to hold on to for you for a week. And note your anxiety levels going up. You're familiar with them. It's called withdrawal. As part of the treatment program at Recovery Calgary, Shannon and I teach about detachment. That we need to detach from certain conditions which we incorrectly think we need in order to be happy. So some examples are things like cars, houses, holidays, jobs, promotions, bank accounts. Try detaching. Try unplugging. What? You may cry? No Facebook? Don't get me started on Facebook. Well, okay, if you insist, just a little. I believe that Facebook, and not to point the finger solely at Mark Zuckerberg, but social media is one of the leading causes of low self-esteem in the world today. And the reason I say that is because we get into comparing ourselves to other people. We get into looking at what's posted on Facebook and believing what's there as the gospel truth. So we see a friend with a new house or a new vehicle, and the parts that they don't post on Facebook is that their mortgage payments are $3,000 a month, or their lease payments are $800 a month, and so on and so forth. Or they talk about the vacation that they just took and what a wonderful time they had over in Europe, but they don't tell us that they maxed their credit cards out and now they owe $15,000 at 24 or 29%. So what does this have to do with step 9, you ask? Nothing. But it has a lot to do with addiction. All of this social media is another form of numbing out, of avoiding, and of not feeling. I have never met someone who is starting a 12-step program or therapy or treatment that comes to see me with an overabundance of self-esteem. We have to remember that happiness comes from within, not from without. Our spiritual and emotional journey is an inside-out journey, not an outside-in journey. There is nothing out there that can truly make you happy. Nothing. All of those cars, those homes, those jobs, the bank accounts can all be gone in a heartbeat. And if that's where you're getting your identity and your self-worth from, what happens if something like that happens to you? And many of you in here have experienced and know that type of loss. I would like to close tonight with a story which I think brilliantly illustrates this. It's been around for a while, so some of you may have heard it, but I think it's important to internalize its teachings. A businessman had just arrived for a vacation in Mexico, and he needed some downtime from the stress of running his business empire. He had just walked into his hotel room and his cell phone rang, and it was his secretary explaining of shipping delays at his company back home on one of their products and some staff members who had not shown up for work that morning. After putting out those fires, he unpacked, he checked his emails, and he dealt with several other problems, and finally decided to go for a walk along the beach to bring his stress levels down. He came to a pier in a quaint village, and he watched a small boat with just one young Mexican fisherman pull into the dock. Inside the small boat were several large yellowfin tuna. The businessman, now enjoying the warmth of the early afternoon sun, complimented the Mexican on the quality of his fish. "Beautiful fish. How long did it take you to catch them?" the businessman casually asked. "Only a few hours," the Mexican fisherman replied. "Can you catch fish like that every day?" the businessman asked. "Oh, yes. I know all the good spots to catch fish," replied the fisherman. "Why don't you stay out longer and catch more fish?" the businessman then asked. The Mexican warmly replied, "With this, I have more than enough to meet my family's needs, and enough that I can give extra to the other members of my family and some to my friends." The businessman then asked, "But what do you do with the rest of your time?" Responding with a smile, the Mexican fisherman answered, "I sleep late, I play with my children, I watch ball games, I take a siesta with my wife. Sometimes in the evenings, I stroll into the village to see my friends, play the guitar, sing a few songs." The businessman impatiently interrupted, "Look, I have an MBA from Harvard, and I can help you become more profitable. You can start by fishing several hours longer every day. You can then sell the extra fish you catch, and with the extra money, you can buy a bigger boat. And with the additional money from that boat, you can before long buy another boat, a third one, a fourth one, and so on, until you have an entire fleet of fishing boats." Proud of his sharp thinking, he excitedly elaborated on his grand scheme, which could bring in even bigger profits. Then, he said, instead of selling your catch to a middleman, you'll be able to sell your fish directly to the processor, or even open your own cannery. Eventually, you could control the product, processing and distribution. You could leave this tiny village and move to Mexico City, or possibly even Los Angeles or New York, where you could even further expand your enterprise. Having never thought of such things, the Mexican fisherman asked, "But how long will this take?" After a quick mental calculation, the Harvard MBA pronounced, "Probably 15 to 20 years, maybe less if you work hard at it." "And then what, senor?" asked the fisherman. "Why, that's the best part," answered the businessman. "When the time's right, you'd take your company public, sell your shares, become very rich, and you'd make millions." "Millions? Really? What would I do with it all?" asked the young fisherman in disbelief. The businessman boasted, "Well, then you could happily retire with all the money that you've made. You could move to a quiet town where you could sleep late, play with your grandchildren, watch ball games, and take a siesta with your wife. You could stroll through the village in the evenings, and you could play the guitar and sing with your friends all that you want." I think we need to simplify, don't we? We need to unplug. We need to put things in perspective. And so I ask you to ask yourself this question: is everything that you are doing today getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow?